Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. Delighted to have you here for this very important conversation as we kick off the 28th year of the Glenbard Parent Series. We had the opportunity to hear Dr. Rebecca Rolland this afternoon, and all of us that are here are in for a real treat. Even before we get started, I would ask you to think about taking a minute and texting or calling someone with young children, because all of those people and the grandparents and the aunts and uncles and teachers will really get so much out of today's event. So I'm so glad that you're here on this beautiful night. I want to thank all the sponsors that make it possible. In particular, today, the Glenbard Early Childhood Collaborative is our partner. But as you could see just a minute ago on our brochure, we have so many annual sponsors that make this all possible. We couldn't do it without them. If you would like to receive a copy of this year's brochure, just email me, gilda_ross@glenbard.org, and we will get you one of these beautiful hard copies that showcases the 50 events that we have scheduled for this year. 3 different languages at noon and at 7 p.m. Some of the past programs you will find on the Glenbard YouTube Parent Series YouTube channel, so I encourage you to take a look at that. Our ask of those listening is to please like us on Facebook if you are a social media person. We are very anxious to let people know that these events are available to families that live across the street or across the country. Our mission is to inspire, engage, and connect for the well-being of all families. And once again, so glad that you made the time to be here today. I want to spend a minute telling you about what's upcoming. Our first week is off to a busy week because on Thursday we will be welcoming 2 speakers that we've had on our wish list for a very long time. The authors of the book Smart and Scattered will be joining us. That is Dr. Richard Gere and Dr. Peg Dawson. You probably, or you may or not have heard about their important series, Smart but Scattered. They'll be with us Thursday at 7 and at noon. Then the following week, we'll be welcoming investigative reporter Jennifer Wallace with her new book, Never Enough. The title of that program is Inspiring Balanced Achievement, Self-Confidence, and the Power of Mattering. Next Tuesday, August 29th at noon and 7 p.m. At noon, she'll be in conversation with Lori Gottlieb. You should talk to someone. That's her book. And at 7 p.m., she'll be in conversation with one of our favorites, Judy Lithcott-Haynes, the author of How to Raise an Adult. And then the following week, as part of Suicide Awareness Month, Dr. Matthew Knock, a colleague of Dr. Rolland's from Harvard, will be presenting a talk, Let's Talk About It, Suicide and Other Destructive Self-Harm Behaviors. That is on Wednesday, September 6th at noon and 7 p.m. And then we want you to circle your calendar when we bring back Lisa D'Amour with her new book, The Emotional Lives of Teens. It is a playbook to thrive in trying times, Wednesday, September 13th at noon and 7 p.m. So once again, the ask is to have you please spread the word. At this time, I would like to introduce Janine Woltman, who is the coordinator of the Glenbard Early Childhood Collaborative. She will be introducing Rebecca and will tell you about a special opportunity. So Janine, take it away.
Thanks so much, Gilda. Super happy to be here. I'm Janine Woltman. I'm the coordinator of the Glenbard Early Childhood Collaborative, and really our mission is to support families and providers in our community. Even our vision is working together as a community to create a society that empowers young children and their families. And that's why these presentations have been so important to us to sponsor and to put out to our families, because we think Dr. Rolland's message is really important. So we're so happy you're here today with us and doing 2 in one day. That's amazing. So thank you. Dr. Rolland is a speech pathologist, writer, and Harvard lecturer. She's passionate about the power of language and conversation to enhance relationships. In her latest book, The Art of Talking with Children, she will share how to enrich interactions with the children in our life and build the skills kids really need to thrive. Just one little note before you get started. We do have a couple opportunities for families and providers tonight. There will be a little Google Doc dropped in the chat box. And for any of you that are interested in getting a free copy of Dr. Rolland's book, please feel free to drop your name in there. And if you are a provider and you're looking for Gateways credit, we're able to provide that for this event as well. So just wanted for sure to let you guys know. And Dr. Rolland, I'm not going to take any more of your time. I'm so excited to hear you tonight. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you watching as well. I'm really excited to come here and share what I think is a really empowering and optimistic message about the chance and the opportunities we have every day to enrich our lives and the lives of young children through the daily conversations that we have. So I'm really passionate about the power of conversation as the mom of 2 young children myself. And as a speech pathologist, I've really seen that power throughout my life. And that's something I hope to share with you, as well as strategies to really enhance the conversations you have every day. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. 1 minute. Great. So my talk today is titled The Art, Power, and ABCs of Talking with Young Children to Build Skills and Connection. And the reason is I really think that we have a chance through our everyday talk to help kids feel more connected to us, to feel bonded with us, and to build their kindness, their confidence, and their creativity. So there are really some simple strategies we can put into place today to help make that happen. So I hope this talk enhances the relationships with the kids in your life. Whether you're a mom, a dad, a babysitter, a teacher, or someone who's a friend of a child, I hope you can take these strategies and really just apply them starting today, starting tomorrow with the kids in your life. So I hope that by the end of this talk, you should have a framework and a toolbox of strategies that you can use that actually enrich your life and the lives of your children. So as a mom and a speech pathologist, I'm always talking to parents. And these are just a few of the quotes I've heard recently. So some parents have said, "Oh, I wish my kids and I could be closer. Why won't they open up? My son and I are constantly arguing always over the same things." So kind of a cycle of arguments that start. "I want to know what happens in my daughter's day, but she doesn't want to talk." So this is often, we think that at the end of the school day, children are going to open up, and they don't always do it. Then when we make time to talk, we have a great time, but we're too often on screens. So this is that sense that, oh, it actually works well when we're making the time, but a lot of times we're kind of all on our own devices. And this is common. This is something that I deal with as well. But I think we do have a chance to shift some of these cycles in more positive directions. So in our culture, I think one thing that we often see is we assume that children should open up at certain times and situations. So one very common comment that I get when I talk about my work is, "Oh yes, at the end of the day, when we get in the car, we get on the bus, I ask my children, 'How was your day?' And they inevitably will say, 'Fine,' or they'll say nothing, or they'll shrug, or they'll watch their screens." And this can kind of create a cycle of frustration where we feel like, well, why isn't this child talking? Why can't I ask more questions? And part of it is this assumption that we think, well, children should be ready at the end of often a long day to give us a whole story about what happened and the highs and lows. And this often isn't necessarily possible or easy for a lot of children. So actually, if we think adaptively, in reality, we can have far richer conversations when we adapt to what children really want and need. So oftentimes children do want to talk about their day. They do want to share their experiences, but they may be just tapped out at the end of a long day. It might not be the right time. Or it might be that the question, just how was your day, is really kind of abstract for a child who thinks, well, there were good parts and bad parts. There was my friends, then there was that bad thing that happened. So it can be really actually kind of challenging for some children to answer that question well. So sometimes if we start with this mode of being flexible and adaptive, we can really start to have far richer conversations and interactions. And we can also pull back on that feeling of pressure that we have to say, we have to have this conversation right now. So this talk with that as kind of one example, we'll show how we can harness everyday talk to enrich our children's and our families' lives. This means not that one big talk that you want to have, or that serious talk about death or whatever else is on your mind, but everyday talks when we're waiting for the bus, when we're cooking dinner, when kids are on a walk with us, for example. All of these moments are actually times that we can harness to help children think bigger, to expand their vocabularies, and to help them imagine and dream. So a little bit about me, as Gilda mentioned, that I have studied and then now teach at Harvard, as well as I've worked at Boston Children's Hospital as a speech pathologist for many years. At the same time, I have a degree in fiction writing from Lesley University. And while these two things might seem very distinct, they actually inform each other, because I really do think a lot about the power of storytelling and how we're actually teaching our children to tell stories of others and of themselves. So how are we talking to them about their level of confidence, about who they are as people, and so on? I also think about language very creatively. I think oftentimes we have chances to use language in playful ways to help children imagine as well. So the good news is that everyday talk is what I call low-hanging fruit. It's all around us. We're always talking to our kids all day. Daily conversations can happen anywhere, anytime. And this doesn't mean to add pressure or to say we have to maximize every second. Quite the contrary. It means we can pull back on a lot of that pressure and start to go with the flow more and to be flexible about when we have our conversations with kids. Also, strategies to enhance conversations are simple, free, and fun. So we can actually have more fun in the moment, even as we build children's language skills and their social skills. So I want to tell a quick story, which I call the story of the line in the sand. And it goes like this. So a child sees a line drawn in the sand. "What's that?" she asks. Her father says one of the following. Perhaps he says, "I don't know." Perhaps he says, "It's a line in the sand," and leaves it at that. Perhaps he says, "Probably someone's drawing. Let's get going." Or perhaps he says, maybe it's the start of a drawing, a monster's head or the roof of a house. What do you think? What might you add? So all of these are possible answers to that question. And I wouldn't argue that any of these are bad answers. They all answer her question and they all do a reasonable job. However, they do differ in terms of the language the child is hearing, in terms of the opportunities the child has to think and to speak, and even in terms of the relationship that the child has with her father. So for example, when we think about this question, what does a child learn about language and the world from each of these? Well, you might say, "I don't know." That's a pretty bland answer. That kind of says nothing. And at one level, yes, that's very true. "I don't know" says nothing. And if the father were to turn away and to turn to his phone, it would suggest, yeah, this isn't a very interesting conversation. At the same time, if the father says, "Well, I don't know," and then leaves some openness, asks the child, "Well, what do you think it is?" That might not be very bad. That might actually be a very great opportunity for the two of them to start kind of from a blank slate and for the child to say, "Well, here, I'm going to imagine something." So there's really opportunity in admitting that we don't know something. It can kind of feel hard as a parent to say, "Well, I don't know what that is." But at the same time, it can give children the opportunity to come up with something. At the same time, these more straightforward answers, they do answer the question, but they don't really allow children to build on an answer and to have a back and forth with an adult. The last answer, however, when the father says, maybe it's a monster, maybe it's the roof of a house, what would you add? What do you think? This suggests a playful back and forth where the child might add something, the father might add something else, and then the two of them are kind of engaged in this creating of ideas and brainstorming together. And this can be an actually really fun opportunity for the two of them to start thinking together and really thinking aloud. And it also can help build their relationship. So now they're actually enjoying each other's company and having a moment together they might not have had before. So you might say, well, this is just really analyzing language. This is a small moment. And this is definitely true. But at the same time, we're always having these moments with our children, day in and day out. And these small moments really accumulate. So if we can have more of those kinds of positive interactions with our children, where we're helping them brainstorm, well, we're playing alongside them, we're much better connected to our children, and we're much less likely to have more of those acting out behaviors due to children feeling disconnected from us, or due to feeling that all we do all day is nag them or something like that. So we actually have the chance to build in these small moments a really profound starting point for cycles to build. So I want to step back for a minute and think about, well, why should we focus on daily talk now? Obviously, children have been talking for quite some time. We have been talking for some time. But really now, I think is an especially important time because we live in what I think of as a language desert, which is we have a lot of talk, meaning there are many words all day, every day, which we encounter and which children encounter, whether it's on social media, in the news, from friends, from colleagues, from classmates. We constantly hear talk. But at the same time, there's not always a lot of meaningful talk and interaction happening. So you think about scrolling through lots of memes, lots of social media updates, and we wonder, well, how much are we really meaningfully engaging with the person in front of us? So even though we have all of these words, I really want to take the time to think about, well, how can we have more meaningful interactions where we feel engaged and the children in front of us do as well? So when I wrote the book, The Art of Talking with Children, I really did try to bring in research. So what do we know about the ways that talk can help children? And we know so much now, especially from neuroscience, which is showing that the back and forth conversation we have with children literally builds their brains. So it actually helps their brains build connections, build neurons, or build connections between neurons. And this is definitely even more true in the first 3 years of life. So we know that there is a huge science behind conversation. But at the same time, we also know that it's an art. There is no one size fits all. And really, your authentic personality and your children's unique personality should be at the fore. So the best kind of communication, I think, is really blending the science with the art. We're focusing on communication at the heart of our relationships. So I want to introduce a question, and you can feel free just to think about this, or if you're moved to add to the chat, to think of the last time you felt truly connected to the child or children in your life. And what were you doing at that time? And what were you talking about? This might be a simple moment you think about. It might be something very profound, but just the last time we really did feel connected to the child you were with. So I'll give you just a second to think about that, and if you want to add to the chat as well. And as you're thinking, I'll add my own example, riding in the car on a long road trip. Interesting, yes. And I do think that the car is something that comes up really frequently, in part because I think we're not always facing each other directly. So it's sort of less confrontational. We're together, we're doing something, but we have the chance to just let the road unfold and to really start to have those more relaxed conversations because there's not really much else to do. While my son plays the guitar, and I love that because there's that chance of creativity, of music, and of play. I'm going to tell just a brief example. My own example was this 15-minute walk. So it was December when I asked my daughter, who's now 11, what do you think was the best thing that happened this year? And we had gone on vacation. She had a school play recently. There have just been tons of exciting stuff happening. And I was really surprised when she said, well, this. And I sort of laughed and I said, well, what do you mean this? And she's like, well, this walk that we do every single Saturday and Sunday to our cafe. And I sort of said, well, why? And she answered something like where she just felt like I didn't have any agenda. I didn't have anything I needed to tell her. I was just always there, and I was always kind of quiet and listening to her. And she felt as though she could just talk about whatever was on her mind and didn't feel like there was any pressure for her to be right, for anything to come of it, for any result to happen. And that actually is something that I think is relatively rare in a lot of our lives, where we're really busy, where we have lots going on. And I think that that was meaningful to me as a lesson, to think about establishing this kind of weekly time with no expectations, and not necessarily even any pointed questions, just the chance to hear what is on each other's minds. We often play games like 20 questions or Would You Rather, these kinds of silly games, but they do really tell us a bit about what happened during the week, what our priorities are, what we like, and so on. Yes, and I liked some of the comments as well. Reading a book I did not think he was ready for. So yeah, sometimes when our expectations are upended in that way, it's great. And then we were having lunch and he started talking about an incident that happened with another child sitting at the table for a meal. So yes, I think the common thread I'm seeing is this sense of connection over times that we're really together. We're facing each other, or we're close by, we're relaxed, and we're having the chance to really hear what's on each other's minds. So with that in mind, started having venting sessions during our walks. Yes, I do think that walking, when you're in motion, whether it's the car, the walking, having this chance to really start to relax and let the talk unfold naturally. So I do think really at its best, meaningful conversations can do a few key things. They can create stronger bonds between you. They can build children's skills, so their kindness, their confidence, their empathy, and more skills. And they can enhance the dynamics at home and school. So you often feel as though we're starting these positive cycles where, for example, with my daughter, if I don't go on a walk in the weekend, she says, well, what's the time for our walk? When are we going? Because she's started to expect this is what we do. We have that time. And unless there's something pressing, we're going to keep doing it. The risk, however, is that we are in a society that makes it very challenging to have these kinds of times. So oftentimes, given the demands of school, the demands of sort of academics, our job situations, kids are often asked to respond rather than to create. So they're taking lots of tests, they may be in soccer class or doing lots of other activities, which are great for them in themselves. But when they all accumulate, we don't have a lot of time for children to really create ideas, to brainstorm along with an adult. There's also this emphasis on getting it right faster. So oftentimes we want children to be efficient, to do things as fast as possible. And while this is very helpful at some times, as when it happens too much, we can really have it come at the expense of creativity. This can also create perfectionism, where children become anxious or sense that I need to be the best always. And all of that makes it really hard to build language skills in a relaxed fashion. But as a result, children need language support more than ever for many of these factors. So to manage conflicts and stay friends, to learn through disagreement, really to develop nuanced empathy at all ages, and to celebrate differences in thinking, learning, and beliefs. And this celebration is really important, not simply to tolerate the fact that other people are different from us, but actually to celebrate the fact that we can learn from these differences, and these differences are actually a positive. So what I want to emphasize is, as a speech pathologist, I see many children with communication difficulties. But even if you have a child who has no communication difficulties and is typically developing, they oftentimes still will struggle with certain aspects of communication. So I think all children have something they're great at in terms of communication and something that's more challenging for them. So I wanted to just create this list to see, do you know a child like this? For example, who shuts down when you want to talk, who gets frustrated trying to express themselves, has trouble thinking flexibly, gets upset about mistake making, struggles to empathize, or who struggles with social skills. And a lot of these things are completely typical. So especially for young children, oftentimes they do want to express themselves, but they don't always have the words. So with that in mind, I've really seen these common themes. First, that young children especially have bigger ideas than they can express at first. So they actually do need support. They feel more deeply than they have the words to say. So I've seen a child, for example, who often would say, I feel sad. And the mom understandably was worried, I think my child might be depressed. And this definitely is a possibility. But at the same time, when she investigated further, she saw that the child really was at one time jealous of another child. At another time, she was disappointed. So it wasn't necessarily the kind of sadness the mom had thought it was at first. That's not to say there aren't children who are depressed. But at the same time, we really want to think about, well, how can we help children articulate more specifically what they're feeling and why they're feeling that so that we can help them better? And oftentimes children really do long for this kind of support, to name their experiences and to explore them, to really remember things and to create those kinds of stories of themselves. So at the same time, there are oftentimes ways in which we tend to talk to young children, which don't always scaffold them or support them to stretch in the ways that they could. So for example, we oftentimes focus on logistical talk and questions. So how many of us have washed our hands? How many of us have our shoes on? We may emphasize right answers over exploration. So for example, what colors do we see? And this is definitely not to say we should not teach children colors or numbers. I certainly understand that I agree that children need to learn these things. But at the same time, I want to emphasize we should also focus on stretching children to explore big ideas, to think of lots of different ideas, not just the right answers. We may talk about abstract ideas without grounding them. So for example, asking a young child, what does peace mean? The child might not have any context for understanding that question. They might be able to get there, but they need more support at first. And then to move children along when they're interested in a question. So oftentimes if a child says, well, I have another question about that. And we say, okay, next question. We want to move things along. And sometimes we need to. So sometimes we need to get out the door. We need to go to another child. But at the same time, I'd argue that really just if we can stop a couple of times a day and really explore with that child what their questions are, what the next question is, and we have a great opportunity to really help them build their language skills and build their ideas as well. So these are some of the alternatives. We really can use the logistical talk as we need, but focus on big ideas. So for example, thinking about talking about our homes and what's good about our house, for example. We can then think about, well, what makes a comforting home? That's a much more abstract question, but it comes out of something that's more grounded. We can teach right answers, but also emphasize exploring. So this more generative kind of talk. How many ways can we describe that tree? Or how many kinds of cups could we invent? What possible shapes could they have? We always want to be thinking about grounding more abstract ideas in concrete ideas. So for example, something that children see in front of them. Where are those bees flying? Say if we see a group of bees. And then once we talk about that, we might say, well, what's the goal of a hive? Why are the bees flying to the hive? So we're getting to that more abstract idea, but we're starting concrete. And then stopping and simply just helping children explore when they're interested. So yes, let's just stay a while. Let's see what they do in a much more open-ended way than we may otherwise. Also playing in our talk. So I often think about playfulness in language, but also we can really play with children through talk. So things like jokes and puns, riddles, nightly rituals. So oftentimes for a while, my children would ask me every night, let's interview us about my day, or I'm going to interview you about your day. And we took turns and said, I'm going to be the interviewer and I have these 20 questions you have to answer. Obviously, not every night would work like that, but sometimes this really does create a more playful way of sharing than simply just having conversations go. Also, sometimes creating these kinds of fun competitions, like 1 minute to think of possible solutions, go. So in this sense, you're allowing children to really start to race against the clock, which lots of kids like to do, and say, well, let's try to generate as many answers as possible. So this is kind of this creative brainstorming process. Similarly, we can use humor and play as a tool of self-awareness. So I've asked kids, for example, imagine you're a magician and could transform your greatest weakness into your greatest strength. What would you do and why? And you might be surprised by the answers you get. So I've heard children who actually I thought were very strong academically say, oh, I wish I was better at school. School is the one thing I would transform. Other kids might say, oh, I wish I was better at making friends. So you really do get a sense of children's priorities, but you get that sense in a much more playful way than if you ask them directly. Similarly, children do often need this scaffolding, which means just really starting concrete and moving up gradually. So these are just some examples of questions going from something that's right in front of children to something that's much more abstract. So starting with, for example, where are these ants going? Assuming that you, as I've done many times, sit and watch ants carrying leaves or doing something similar in a line. Where are the ants going? Why are they all going in that direction? Moving to, for example, how are ants and humans alike? Or would you rather be in a human or an ant society, and why? So here you see, you might not ask all of these questions at once, but you see how we're moving from something that's right here and now in front of you to something that's much more abstract, and doing it in a way that works with a child. So if you notice a child doesn't get it, or this doesn't make sense at all, you would step back. You wouldn't simply keep asking these questions. So why back and forth talk? In addition to what we know about this talk building children's brains, which is obviously important, we're doing a lot of other things. So we're allowing children to stretch their ideas through feedback. So they're starting to hear, oh, this is how the other person thinks about that. We're getting a sense of what they're thinking and feeling before rushing in with answers. So oftentimes I've seen parents where a child might ask a really big question, like, what is death? And the parent immediately says, oh, I have to come up with this big lecture, or I have to come up with a really good answer to that question. And sometimes we really need to just simply step back and think about what is really on a child's mind. Where is this question coming from? And it might be something very serious. It might mean that they have heard about a friend's relative who passed away and they're very worried. Or it might mean something completely not serious. Maybe they read that word in a comic book and they have no idea what it is. So by actually stepping back and figuring out, well, where is this question coming from? What's the context? We really have a much better way of answering the question than if we start to panic or feel like we need to come up with an answer. You also learn what your child knows. So these are just some examples of questions I've gotten from children recently. So things like, did wars only happen 100 years ago? Is it true that if you eat a seed, a plant will grow in your stomach? Or didn't dinosaurs and humans live at the same time? So here, rather than saying, well, here I'm going to start with a lecture about dinosaurs, we start to understand, okay, well, this is what my child knows, and this is where I should start from. So actually, by hearing children's questions first, rather than after the fact, we have a chance to really start to unwind and unravel what does that child need and want to know. So after these kinds of great conversations, children might say things like, well, I didn't get what I want, but I understand why. So this is not an argument for permissive parenting or permissive raising of children. Children might not get what they want, but they're able to learn how to compromise. Or things like, I'm surprised that a stranger could have that much in common with me. So thinking about building connections. So these conversations have a double promise. They first build your relationships in the moment. So you're having more fun. You're feeling like your relationship is less based on nagging or trying to get your children to do things. And then over time, you're building children's skills. So things like kindness, their confidence, and their creativity. And it's all through these small moments that are accumulating. So you don't actually see children in the moment becoming more creative. But over time, if you step back and look, well, 6 months back or 4 months back, they weren't doing that. They weren't talking that way. You see the growth. You also have the chance sometimes to stop tantrums before they start. So a lot of times parents ask me, well, how can you have a great conversation when a child's having a tantrum? And the really short answer is that you can't. So these kinds of conversations that are reflective, that are deeper, they don't happen when either you or your child are very dysregulated. They do need to happen in a certain zone when you're both able to be reasonably calm. But at the same time, you can have these conversations as reflections before and even after tantrums. So for example, if you're going to a store where you know that your child's going to want a lot of the things, you can start to have these kinds of planning conversations. So What is it you most want at the store? What can we do if they don't have those things? Or if we can't afford those things? Or if I say we can't buy those things? So this really does a couple things. It's preparing children for what might happen. And it's also building their self-regulation skills. So they're starting to think a little bit for themselves in small ways. Well, what can I do? How can I manage with this disappointment if I face that? And it doesn't mean that it's going to fix everything, but it does mean that you have that small moment where your child is building self-awareness. They're building skills to think about, well, what might I do otherwise? What other strategies could I find? And that's a really key thing to happen over the long term. So I've really worked to develop this method I call rich talk, which is the way I've thought about having these conversations in an easy to remember fashion. So it just goes ABC. So I think if you can keep these ABCs in mind, when you have conversations, you're really on your way to making them much more meaningful and more memorable. So the first is adaptive. And that goes to what I spoke about earlier. When I think about being flexible and responding to children's wants and needs, this is thinking about, for example, the timing when you're having a conversation. Maybe your child is not in the mood to be open or to talk about that. Maybe you're not in the mood. Maybe this simply isn't the right time. And I often have told my own children and children in my life that, oh, I'd love to talk about that, but I'm really not feeling relaxed enough or like we have the time to get into that. So let me kind of bookmark that talk. We can have that talk, but let's do it later today, or let's do it in an hour. So you're letting your child know, well, I care about this talk. I want to have it, but it's really just not something I'm ready for at this exact moment. So that shows your child that you care, but that you're actually going to wait until it's going to work for you better. And same thing goes with the child, teaching your child to respond to their moods and to say, for example, Mom, I'd love to talk, but I really need 10 minutes by myself. And I think that for some kids, especially introverted kids, that can work really well because sometimes they really do need that quiet time before they're ready to come and talk to you. B stands for the back and forth. So like I said, actually going and making sure there is some sort of ping-ponging of you talking, a child talking, another child talking, and it's not one person lecturing or one person sitting and listening. C is for child-driven. So really starting with the child's goals, their interests, and their needs. That doesn't mean every conversation should start that way, but it does mean when we think about what should I talk about? What do I do with this child in front of me, especially if maybe you've never met the child before? Really thinking about, we don't have to come up with a topic. The child will come up with a topic for us. Kids have so much they want to talk about, so much they want to explore. And even for children who aren't talking yet, they have so much that's interesting to them. So oftentimes I'm seeing young children who are not talking, but they may be pointing at something, or they may be looking at something. And you can use that as a sign of interest and start to talk about what's right in front of you in a way that's engaging to them. And this is a conversation in itself. It doesn't always have to involve words. So by thinking about these three aspects, the ABCs, you're really on your way to having these more successful conversations. And then following that, you can think about what I call the 3 E's, which is really just how do we apply this rich talk idea. And so it goes like this. First, to expand on a child's thinking, which just means to stretch it, to add words, to add vocabulary and syntax. Then to explore aspects beyond the here and now. And that just means to really get beyond just what's right in front of you and to think about things like imagining the past, thinking about the future, thinking about the what ifs of our world. And then finally, the E for evaluate. So think about judging or considering your strategies, your thinking process. What worked well? What didn't work well? What might you try the next time? So what do these 3 E's actually sound like? So first, the expand. Say a child or young child says green truck. You might say, well, that is a green truck. It's also a little dirty with funny wheels. So you're giving the child more language. You're making their sentence full sentences. So that's actually giving them a model of how they can talk. And you're showing you're interested in what they're interested in. Exploring. So how might we make the truck go upside down? This is thinking more about those abstractions. So maybe you're imagining how to make the truck disappear. Maybe you're imagining what the truck would look like if it was 10 times bigger. So you're helping the child imagine possibilities. And then 3, evaluate. So this is assuming, say you just played a game with a child. You might ask, well, what part of the game did you like best? What might we do differently next time? Or even, for example, what if you could invent a new rule for this game? What would you invent? And this is allowing a child not to be judgmental, but to start to bring their critical faculties to bear. So as I think about talk, I really think that it can obviously help learning in ways that I've just described, but can really also help in many other areas. So I think a lot of things we really want for children, for example, having more empathy, having stronger social skills, and being more confident, are all things we can build through talk. So I think that we should really start with setting a listening stage. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now, which is just to think that before we have these back and forth conversations, we need to really help children learn how to listen and help ourselves learn and model how to listen as well. So there are actually some questions we can ask, which we can support children in modeling and in using themselves. So for example, listening questions. I understand this part, but not that part. Can you tell me more? Or I thought that part was really interesting. Can you describe how you found that out? This really shows that we're doing that reflective listening process. We're taking the time to think about what we heard and to be reflective about it. We can also show them how to ask arguing questions. So oftentimes, especially with young children, there's a tendency to say, well, I don't agree with you and I'm going to walk away, or I won't be your friend. This is sometimes inevitable, but other times we can really help children to think through arguments and remain friends, or to remain in the conversation. So for example, well, I'd read something different about that, or I'd heard something different about that. Can you tell me where you got your information? And this is helping them actually think critically. Not all sources are created equal. And we really want to think about where we hear things from, whether that's a true source or possibly not. Also, that part seems like an opinion. Can you tell me about the other side? And this is, for example, taking children and trying to help them see another person's perspective. Especially if a child has a very strong opinion, it can be very powerful to say, okay, well, let's imagine you have the opposite opinion. Can you really take the time to argue for that opposite side? So when we set the stage, a couple things are happening. So children are learning respect for others' opinions. They're learning they can argue in a civil way and remain friends. And we're creating this culture of mutual respect. So I want to just give one example before stopping for questions. This example is the dad is talking loudly on a work call while 8-year-old Jasmine's trying to do homework. Jasmine yells, "You're always so loud, Dad. Can't you be quieter? I'm trying to think." Dad says, "Shh, I'm on a call." Jasmine says, "You're always on a call. It's so annoying." And Dad mutes the call and then yells, "Seriously, can you be any ruder? Go to your room, all right?" Obviously, nobody looks that great in this scenario. But then later that night, they all take some time to reflect on what happened. So Jasmine says, "I'm so mad about how you yelled at me earlier." And Dad says, "I know, I'm sorry for having yelled. I know that's not how we want to talk to each other, but I didn't appreciate your rudeness either." And Jasmine says, "Well, I'm sorry too, but I really can't think when you're so loud." Dad asks, "How can we fix this for the next time?" So you'll notice a couple of things here. First, Jasmine expresses her upsetness and anger, and she's not shamed for it. So her dad isn't saying, well, you're not allowed to be mad. She is allowed to have her feelings. At the same time, the dad apologizes, but also tells Jasmine he didn't appreciate how she acted. So there's this sense that there's mutual respect, but we're not letting kids do whatever they want. And parents are realizing, well, sometimes we do things we don't mean as well. So they then take the time to have more of a discussion. Jasmine asked, well, what about you stop taking work calls? How can we fix this next time? Dad says, well, that can't really happen, but I can try to take them in another room. Or if you think I'm too loud, try tapping me on the shoulder. And what can you do differently? Jasmine says, well, I can try not to yell. And if I really need quiet right away, I can go to my room. So in this sense, we're getting this feeling that, okay, everybody's going to try to make an effort. Everyone realizes that things didn't exactly go the best way that they could have, and they're going to try to create a different cycle the next time. So in this case, everyone's expressing their feelings without shame. This is not necessarily the best answer. There could be many answers. There could be many solutions. This is simply an example to show how adults can support children in working through these compromises and set the stage for things to work differently the next time. This also is helping children build empathy. So empathy involves taking another person's perspective and sharing their emotions. So these discussions help children see, well, this is the perspective of my parent or the other adult, and I can start to understand why they might be mad, as well as why I might be mad. The key message is all of our needs are important, and we can reach a compromise. So consider this scenario versus comments such as, "You're always so mean, Jasmine, try harder to be nice," okay? Which kind of gives the same message, but doesn't really allow for any compromise. So just to sum up, we can really get away from these kinds of conversational shoulds. So my child should want to talk, all the children should have an answer, and focus on these kinds of invitations. So things like that are more relaxed. Let me tell you something funny that happened today. Did anything funny happen to you? When you're ready to explain, let me know. Or how can we link your idea to what we're discussing? So oftentimes when kids are really off topic, it can be really helpful to actually ask them to articulate, well, how can you bring your idea to the topic we're talking about? This isn't in a judgmental way, but simply to help them create those kinds of connections. Also, I'm just going to leave it with the last slide, the art of curious waiting. So I invite you to try this out, which is just to spend several minutes observing your child. Bring curiosity to these observations. So what's guiding the child's behavior? What questions might they be asking? Imagine the child's mind and offer a question invitation, something very simple. So something like, tell me more, or what's that part about? And let your curiosity be the guide. In this way, we're really helping children be understood and be heard at all ages. And I really think that all kids at every age really want this, and that our conversations can help them in the moment and also give them a model that they can use later on for the rest of their lives. So thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful, and I'd like to stop the share there and open it up for any questions or thoughts.
I can speak for everybody listening. That was very helpful. I'm sure of it. I know from all the notes that I've just taken. So many important thoughts here. This idea about the flexibility, about leaning into what is the best time for your child. And I hear it over and over when you're picking them up at the end of the day, or they're home for lunch and you're just dying to hear how everything went, and you don't want to be mining for tragedy. I know that, we won't go there, but that may not be the time, and they just may need that. So that flexibility, leaning into what is the right time for them. And I love what you said about how these small moments accumulate. And what I'm taking away is it's really not all that hard if we just really have that awareness that doesn't have, this is that at any moment, at any small moment. And I love that idea of the playfulness, the humor, and that how to build that creativity. I love what you said about going into the grocery store or wherever it is and having that pre-conversation about what will we do when we find something and we can't afford, etc. And what about some post conversations? You mentioned that. So tell me about a post conversation. We've now left the store in different scenarios, okay?
Yes, definitely. Yes. And I've had many of these myself, and I think that you might find a variety. It's sort of to figure out what works for your family. But some things, for example, might be, say your child says, oh, I really wanted that fidget spinner. And how much, I actually had this conversation today. That's why it's on my mind. I really wanted that fidget spinner and it cost $9. And why didn't we buy it? And, so you can talk about, well, how much do you think a fidget spinner should cost? You can talk about, do you think that's overpriced? Do you think we could find it for less? Then what about, well, how much allowance do you have? Do you think you could afford it? Do you think you could maybe earn money that you could afford it later? You give children kind of the sense of optimism and empowerment to think, well, maybe I can't get it now. Maybe my mom's not going to buy it for me this moment, but maybe I could in the future do it myself. And then that gives me kind of the sense of control as well as, well, maybe I don't have to have a tantrum about it because it is a bit more under my control.
Mhm.
So those are just some brief options.
What is the biggest mistake that parents make when it comes to conversations with their children?
I think especially for young children that we tend to focus on getting them from here to there and all of the business logistical aspects that come with parenting, but at the expense sometimes of taking the time for those bigger conversations. So we often think that little children have kind of little ideas. And so we might say, oh, that's very cute, you drew a doggy, or that's very nice, you did whatever. And we're naming these things for our children rather than leaving it open and saying, well, what is that? What could that be? And oftentimes, even if a child says, oh, it's a doggy, you might say, well, what's that squiggly thing? That doesn't look like a doggy. And they might say, oh, that's the thunder god in the sky or something, something totally unexpected. So really opening up to that, I think, is really helpful.
So you've given us some very specific things. If you were to break up child development into certain stages, what is something specific about maybe 0 to 3 and going on all the way up to high school? What do you think parents need to know each of those stages around conversation?
Yes. So 0 to 3, I'd say definitely is the time when we know the brain is the most plastic. So the connections are being built the most quickly they will ever be built in a person's life. And so we really do have an incredible opportunity, especially then, to focus on the back and forth. And I think that part of it is giving children words. So sometimes they don't have the words. So helping them develop, for example, an emotional vocabulary. That might mean things like looking with a child at pictures of different faces and saying, well, let's talk about how that person might be feeling. Say it's in a book. Helping them get beyond just the bad, mad, happy, sad type of words and start to develop more nuance. This helps them recognize as well what it feels like in their bodies and how emotions actually feel different for all of us. So saying, what is your body doing now? Can you mimic that expression? What does it feel like when you did that? That type of thing. So actually being very concrete, but helping them develop that abstract vocabulary. As well as, I'd say the 3 to 6 ages, much more, we know that the self-regulation skills are really being built then. So things like being able to prioritize one thing over another, being able to stop interrupting all the time or to inhibit things they maybe shouldn't be doing at the moment. So helping children, especially with that planning aspect. So for example, if you think you want to shout something out, what else could you do? What are your other options? Let's think of maybe pictures or a menu of options so you have it right in front of you. Oftentimes we tell kids to do things, but we don't have enough concrete scaffolding for them to make it work. I often see parents, for example, at that age, telling children to clean their rooms. Obviously, I understand why, but oftentimes parents get mad when their children comes back and the room is no cleaner than it was before. Sometimes this is because kids get distracted or they don't want to clean their rooms, but other times it really is because it's kind of an abstract thing. We don't realize how abstract that is to say, clean your room. What do we really mean? Do we mean there are lots of crumbs on the floor? Do we mean your clothes are not folded? Do we mean the toys are all over the place? To us, it's very obvious. But oftentimes to a child of that age, especially, it's not obvious. And I'd argue to children of older ages as well, it may not be obvious. One thing I've had a lot of luck with is actually putting a picture, this is for older kids, but putting a picture of a clean locker inside a locker. So when you're actually thinking about how do I clean my locker? What does that mean? So here's a model. This is what a clean locker looks like. And then they look, this is what my locker looks like. And so without being shaming, without being judgmental, it's simply a concrete reminder to say, well, these are where the things should go. That can work with children of all ages, just to help them have these strategies rather than to feel like they're kind of at sea. And moving along to older children, I'd say elementary school and especially getting to middle school, friendships are really, really critical. So helping children manage conflicts and stay friends, helping them figure out what makes a good friend. What should I do if my friendship becomes kind of toxic or I feel like this friend is trailing me and I'm no longer interested. Having these conversations and feeling like a mentor to a child is really, really helpful. And I think children oftentimes want those conversations, but they might feel like, well, my parent or my adult in my life is going to just tell me, oh, you deal with it, or, oh, you just stay friends, or, whatever. So I think if we can actually have these conversations in a really caring and empathetic way, kids will come back for more of them.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here about building the connection with my tween. Walks, yes. Car rides. Any other suggestions about that?
Yeah, so first I would start with something that your tween or teen is already liking and already engaged with. So maybe it's that your tween or teen is, I'm just going to say teen for ease, likes to play basketball. So actually not feeling like you have to have a conversation, but just maybe playing basketball, having that moment of connection. And then afterwards, taking the time and maybe having something to drink afterwards or having a meal afterwards and having that relaxed moment, maybe sitting outside. And really both of you are feeling more relaxed. Your child may feel a sense of accomplishment. That can be another great time. If it's sports, if it's something you enjoy doing together. Another thing I found helpful is for you to actually figure out what is something your child or your teen can teach you that actually in an authentic way, something you actually don't know. Maybe it's something about the way the car works or something about a video game. And so often I think we have negative perceptions about video games, especially. We just don't want children playing them. And this can sometimes create a wall, actually, with something that kids are really passionate about. So if your child is really into gaming, unless it's, say, something violent or something, unnecessarily unhealthy, it can actually be helpful to kind of be flexible about that and to say, well, I'm going to actually ask my child to teach me something about it, or just to show me how something works. And they oftentimes will light up and be really excited to do that. And that can lead to other conversations down the road.
You talked about the clean room. I remember Sarah Ward once talked about how she would, or the backpack, take a picture of it, of what a clean one looks like, and a clean room. This is what it looks like.
Yes.
The stuffed animals are on the bed, not under the bed, that kind of thing. As you were talking about the older child, I couldn't help but think about how many times we've heard that parents, and sometimes we just really need to listen too, don't we? And to just be that vessel for all of their emotion that they're unloading on us. And then how important it is for us to have someone else to go and unload it with. Yes. Here's another question, not so much a question, but like that at the beginning, you gave examples of behaviors of the kids that parents might not enjoy, but really focusing on our own behavior as parents is the most important. You want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that is so true, is that sometimes we just say, oh, it's this thing that happens with my child is so frustrating. And it might be, well, what is it? Well, it's that my child doesn't want to talk at this exact time. And you think, well, okay, but why does your child have to talk at that exact time? And to realize that we often do have so much that is put upon us kind of as a culture, is that, well, a good parent or a good person has their child tell what happened at the end of their day. And really my child, for example, my 6-year-old, at the end of the day, I joke that he wants peanut butter. He doesn't want to talk. He's like, where's my peanut butter? Because he's so hungry. He's so overwhelmed. He's kind of just wants to fill his face with food before he's able to do anything. And I think that that's true of a lot of kids. So I think to be more flexible and kind of to step back can be so helpful.
You talk a lot about the vocabulary building, which I think is so how easily we can really stretch that. And I think about another person that we've hosted, the author of the book, Permission to Feel, about how important it is to get our kids, and you touched on that, about the specifics, not just sad, not just angry, but the real getting behind that and building the vocabulary. I think that's really key. So I'm in the elevator with you. And there's a parent with a young child, and you have all this knowledge from the research and your experience. And what do you want them to know as you go in this elevator ride with them?
So what I would say is that I think these kinds of everyday conversations are actually, they might seem throwaway or minor, but they're actually the most important chances we have to bond with children and to build the kinds of skills that they're going to need long term. So I think They don't have to be hard conversations. They don't have to be big conversations, but just taking a few minutes, a few times a day to connect with a child and to be open to hearing what they have to say goes a huge way toward establishing your bond and to building a child's language skills and social skills.
It's a busy time of year. Kids are just getting back into school, but you have been so kind to share this toolbox of strategies. Really, really grateful. And this will be available on the YouTube channel for those if you want to share it with a partner, a friend. So grateful, Dr. Rolland. It's been a real pleasure. Can't wait to have you back already. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're going to pull up that slide one more time about how you can possibly take a survey and then enter for a free book. And so we hope you will be back again this week when we welcome back the authors of Smart but Scattered, and programs coming up in the next few months as well. So go to the website, let us know if you need a brochure, and spread the word. We're so grateful to you all. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Good night, everybody.